Well, welcome back to the Unapologetic Podcast. I am your co-host, Brandt Merritt, with
Jonathon Woodyard.
And we are also joined today by our president, Dr. Melson of Southwest Baptist University. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. Glad to be here.
Well, we're excited to talk today about Christian higher education in general, SBU in general, all things you know a lot about, and Jonathon knows nothing about, so we'll be listening to.
I'm just here to look pretty.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you do a great job.
You do a great job.
All done for you.
Yeah. It's too bad this is mostly audio. No one needs to see.
Yeah, that's too bad.
That's all right. But we do like to start with an icebreaker. So Thanksgiving was coming up. I threw these guys out an icebreaker of what is favorite Thanksgiving side dish. So I know I'll let you go first as our guest.
Well, love Thanksgiving. We're kind of non-traditional at Thanksgiving, but one traditional thing we love is sweet potato casserole. Like the sweet potato casserole that has like the pecans and like the
marshmallow.
No, not the marshmallow one. Like the pecans and the butter and the brown sugar on top. That's the best.
Is that the whole family enjoys that?
Everyone loves it unless you have a nut allergy. It's fantastic.
Okay.
But if it's your family, you'd know if that.
Yeah. Well, one does, but everyone else loves it.
There you go. Keep the rest of the food away from it.
Yeah.
I'm a mashed potatoes guy. I make our own mashed potatoes. So
nice.
Cut the potatoes, boil them, put in all the herbs, butter, and sour cream. It's got to have both. And then whip them up. I want them smooth. I don't like chunky mashed potatoes, but I'm proud of our
the good stuff.
Mashed potatoes. Yeah.
That's good. I'm going to choose two.
Break the rules.
Break the rules.
Well, Thanksgiving kind of has like a lot of options.
Yeah,
so that's pretty fair.
So my grandmother would make the dressing.
Oh yeah.
It's this, but the way she did it, like my wife would not like it, and if you see it, it doesn't look super appetizing. It's kind of like almost brownies, kind of that consistency, and you cut them into squares and you eat them, but I absolutely loved it. Drench it with gravy, loved it. The other, my mom's green beans, white half runners, she'd break them, she'd put them in the pot, and bacon or ham in there and let it sit all day long.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so every time I go home, like I went home a couple weeks ago,
right.
My dad had surgery, and she made me a big pot of green beans, and I would just eat them all day.
Good stuff.
So dressing in squares?
Yeah,
that's
weird, but it was so good.
I do. Stuffing. I could eat just a whole meal of. Yeah.
Stuff yourself.
That's so good.
Stuff yourself.
Speaking of meals, we had a good lunch today.
We did. So Dr. Melson and I are still dressed up. Jonathon,
I took my jacket off in my office.
But we had a scholarship luncheon today with donors, alumni connections at the university who have funded scholarships for students, and went well. If you wanted to recap.
Yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity to connect with students, with their donors, the donors who have been part of the university for many years, who invest in this generation of students, kind of paying it forward. Most of the donors, I think, have been connected to SBU for many years, came to SBU probably on scholarship and have that sense of like giving back to pay it forward. Lots of generations in the room, lots of first generation college students that were both donors as well as current students. And big packed room. It's a fantastic time. So
Leon had mentioned, Worth, our Vice President for Advancement, had mentioned a number, like how much money we get out in scholarships last year, which I thought was pretty cool.
I think about $1.25 million. I think there's around 400 plus scholarship donors that are donor funded scholarships, plus lots of other scholarships we give at the university in addition to donor funded. But huge part of what we do, which we'll actually talk about affordability today, because that's a big, huge question in higher ed.
It is. The donors at our table, I thought it was kind of fun because they've actually funded multiple areas of scholarships. Awesome. So their scholarship helps cover some for music, some for nursing, so we had students at our table from all those different disciplines who've all benefited.
There was a family at our table, husband and wife, and the sister of a student that in the year 2000 had died. There's a student here passed away in a car wreck, and then mom and dad started one of the scholarships on her.
Wow!
So it was pretty neat to sit with them and hear that story as well. And then the other couple sitting with a gentleman who had graduated from Southwest Baptist College in 1963 and had gone on, worked in Springfield, a steel kind of business, and then has loved the place and given money to scholarship students to be here with us. Pretty cool to see the different reasons people are given back to a place they love.
Absolutely.
An institution as old as ours, you've got lots of people who've made lots of sacrifices for a long time. So we need to honor them and
absolutely
see the students benefit. And that does dovetail into what we were wanting to talk about today. So there's kind of layers that will go through this conversation, because there's higher education as an industry nationally. There's a subset that we're part of Christian higher education, and then there's SBU and how we're navigating these things. But there are a lot of trends, changes in the industry, lots of noise out there that I'm sure families, students hear about, the state of higher education, the value that people put on higher education. And so if we start there, kind of the big macro level, higher education as an industry, one of the big challenges that we're all navigating is, it's called the enrollment cliff. Many people probably heard about it. We don't need to spend a ton of time on it, but it does sort of set the stage for lots of the things that we're facing. So when we talk about the enrollment cliff, we talk about the number of students that are going to college. You've spent a lot of time studying it, a lot of time sharing information with the university about it. So where would you start in trying to unpack what
I think these are huge issues and challenges and opportunities, because there are major demographic changes that are taking place across the entire industry. I mean, that's happening not just in this country, but in a lot of ways across the world. So from an enrollment standpoint, we talk about the enrollment cliff. Some of that is tied to the birth rate of 2008, 2009 during the Great Recession. So here in 2026, we're kind of expecting fewer students to go into college, just simply because there were fewer births that took place 18 years ago, right? So that's kind of a piece of that enrollment cliff that we're looking at. But a lot of this is demographic changes. It kind of changes in the entire population pools across literally the world. So as you kind of look about what's happening in this country, we see this kind of initial cliff that everyone's talking about in 2026. But then you're also just kind of looking at the demographic changes over the next couple of decades. So we're expecting population decline in the U.S. We know that China has already seen a population peak. They hit 1 billion and are actually declining now. The U.S. is supposed to hit a peak by around 2040. So there's actually a little bit of growth from 2030 to 2040. And then we're looking at strong decline all the way for the next 50 years after that. In fact, right now, population experts say that we'll hit a total population worldwide by 2050 will be the peak of population in the world, and it will decline after that. Now, these are all speculations based on lots of different things, but a lot of this is tied to birth rates. It's tied to what's happening across the world. We know places like India are still growing. That's now the largest country in the world. So as we think about a place, we're in Bolivar, Missouri, how does that affect us, and how does that affect us in this state? Well, in Missouri, and you've heard me say this many times, in 2012 was kind of the peak of the number of college students in the state of Missouri. There were about, in fact, I think nationally it's like 2010, Missouri is 2012. We had 400,000 college students in the state of Missouri. Today we have 300,000 college students. Well, that drop of 25% of college students, we still have basically the same number of universities. So when you start to do the math, it's a pretty straightforward reality, right? So there's just fewer students going to the same amount of colleges across the country. So I think that's kind of the big picture. But interesting things are also part of that demographic change. One of them is, for example, high school graduation rates are actually increasing. So we have more students graduating from high school, but here's an interesting fact. Fewer are choosing college and university.
The non-consumer.
We've got the non-consumers, exactly. So kind of that bigger change that's happening. So I think one of the things that I hear often is this is not a storm to be weathered, but it's a new normal. We hear a lot of that kind of post-COVID language, like this is the new normal or what is that? But I think that's really true. Like this isn't like, if we could just kind of get through this season in the sector of higher education, then we're going to be okay. I think there's dynamics about that, but I think the reality is like we have to rethink and reshape the future for higher education for the reality of what that looks like.
Right.
So I have a follow-up thinking about numbers. So you're talking about population, 400,000 to 300,000, but if you narrow in on the challenges for Christian higher education, so, and I'm thinking particularly about Aaron Wren, and has written an article, talked about what he called positive world, neutral world, negative world, but really kind of this kind of negative world, Christianity on the margins. I don't think we're ready to say we're a post-Christian society yet, but there's a decline in evangelicalism, and people affiliating with evangelicalism. So does that present a particular challenge for a Christian institution?
Well, I think it does. So, we talk about higher education as a sector. You have privates, you have publics. Within privates, you have faith-based institutions like SBU. You have confessional institutions like SBU that are very specific in our convictions and our confessions. And when you think about this kind of smaller subsector or within that dynamic of higher education, I think there are interesting things. And I think if you look out on the larger landscape, I think across all industry right now, there's a trust factor. There's low trust across our entire country in every sector. So you have people that are discerning about decisions that they're making. Some of this is interesting because, the GI Bill post-World War II, you had a significant growth in higher education. So we've really only seen a wave of growth in higher education by and large since World War II, other than the last decade. So over the last decade, several things have happened. COVID, of course, impacted higher education significantly, but then this idea of the value of education. And I think in Christian higher education in particular, many institutions that were faith-based that started, say 1850s in particular, we have denominational schools all across the Midwest. Many of those schools are really no longer Christian, just to be quite frank. They may have Christian in their name, they may have, a denomination in their name, but they still don't hold those same values. I think that's when we kind of talked about SBU and how that affects SBU. I think that's a unique positioning because we still hold true to our longtime confessions and commitments as an institution. But in the sector, that's a smaller and smaller number of schools. And mission drift, I think, is one of the challenges that all institutions face, is staying true to your mission. I think that's true in the public sector. I think it's true in the private sector. It's certainly true in the Christian sector.
Yeah. Do you think there's something?
No, good.
Do you think there's something to be said for, if you're talking to Christian parents, particularly talking to them about places you can trust? Is that something we should be talking to families about? Hey, we're true to our confessions of faith. We're held accountable.
Absolutely.
We're a place you can trust.
Yeah, I think so. When we start to talk about SBU as an institution within the larger sector, so we have these larger big issues happening from enrollment and demographic changes, those types of things. But there's big shifts taking place across the country with regard to higher education. So, if you watch the news at all, you know that there are challenges that are happening, especially in some privates, historic privates have been around for hundreds of years, that have really distanced themselves from their historic convictions and or even connections to any type of religious or.
Well, so many of the Ivy League schools started
absolutely
Christian.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was in the mission.
Yeah.
Right.
So you've had this sense in which the larger culture looks and say, well, I don't want to send my kids to that. Because we see what's happening in the news and what's happening there. So I think there's a trust factor for sure. I think our response to that is addressing SBU in the way that we've held true to our convictions and our confessions and what we're doing in equipping a whole person student. So I think for us, there is a response that we have to make sure that we're really clear about because all institutions are not the same. And there's too many institutions. I've literally heard institutions with Christian in their name and say, well, the C doesn't stand for that anymore. And I think when you move to that place as a society, then there is a reason to question this idea of Christian education. I think there's also, so affordability and cost are big issues in the landscape right now in higher education. This is true across the board. Publics have increased exponentially in cost, as have privates. Now, interestingly enough, even though the public sector will say higher education is way more expensive than the CFI and all these kind of things, but the reality is, education costs have actually stayed relatively flat. We just feel it more acutely. I think in the current economy and the things related to that, I think families that start looking at cost, especially with private education, there's kind of a misunderstanding of the sticker price and then how much a student pays. I think that idea of affordability and accessibility is an ongoing conversation that we have to have with families. But ultimately, I would say it's an issue of value and cost. It's about the value of an education, what it provides. We know emphatically and empirically that a value of education still has a return on investment. Now, I would say the current student who's 18 to 22 looking at it, they're not necessarily thinking ROI. Their parents might be thinking ROI, but they're looking for opportunity. They're looking for optionality. They're looking for career pathways, like how can I get a first job and those types of things. Interestingly enough, wages are higher when you have an undergraduate degree over the lifespan of that. I mean, that's
almost, I think it averages $20,000 to $30,000 a year more
significant
in earnings for those with a bachelor's degree than those don't.
Absolutely. Right. So there's a short-sightedness for some that say, well, is it really worth it? We know empirically over a lifetime, it's without a doubt financial return on that investment. Even Dave Ramsey will argue that. Now, Dave Ramsey, I think, wisely says, choose wisely the degree that you choose and don't go into a lot of debt for that. But he's not actually an anti-debt for higher education position. He would say, just choose wisely where you go. and how much you pay for what degree, and what degree is going to set you up well for that kind of education.
Right. So that was one of the things I was going to think about. You've touched on it a little bit recently in the tool belt generation type of idea. So, if you look at someone who's questioning the value of a 4-year degree, looking at the cost of a private education like ours, and they look down the road and it's like, well, hey, I can go get a welding degree or plumbing training and go right into a career field, start earning money, take out very little or maybe no debt, because so many states do have these programs for community college or technical school to go at such a low cost. And so there's a draw to that type of experience for students who are just so hyper concerned about cost and wanting to get a job right away. So how does that play into it? And there's things we've talked about of how we're not probably going to offer a plumbing degree on SBU's campus down the road, but there are ways that we can still support those students and they can kind of get a full experience. But that's a newer dynamic, I think.
Yeah, I think there's interesting things happening in, I would say, the trades across the country. We need plumbers, we need electricians, we need welders, and we need to equip them and prepare them. There's no question about that. The emerging trend that I would say I would have a greater concern about isn't necessarily trades, because we actually need the trades and we need to have pipelines into trades. I think the growing concern that I have is this population of people that are not consuming anything. They're not consumers of education, they're not in training, and they're not currently employed. They're called NEETs, N-E-E-T-S, so not in education. NEET, N-E-E-T-S, so they're NEETs. They're not in education, employment, or training. And these are 18 to 25-year-olds. 7 million young men in this population are not doing anything. They're not in employment, they're not in education, they're not in training. So we talk about tool belt generation. I mean, one of the opportunities is to provide pathways for students that are not currently involved anywhere. I think in a lot of ways, kind of post-COVID, there's a lot of things that COVID did that set this current generation back a bit from an educational standpoint. So there's apprehension about continuing education. But I think one of the things we have to, I think for SBU, we have a great opportunity to talk about is how a small institution like SBU can be personalized in such a way that provides a pathway for any student. I was a first generation college student. My parents did not go to college. I came from a military family. My dad was a factory worker. Provided a great life for us. We had a wonderful place. I grew up in almost Mayberry. I mean, I think I loved the experience that I had. But my parents were not college graduates. So when I started looking at going to college, that was an unknown pathway. And we still had many, many students in that same kind of question mark of, well, what am I to do? And one of our promises at SBU is to create pathways for students that they can help realize their dreams. But a lot of students don't even know what their dreams are right now. Do you know that of the current generation, Gen Z, they will have they'll have 3 careers and 30 jobs in their lifetime. Now listen to that, 3 careers and 30
crazy.
jobs.
Yeah.
So when you think about a lifetime, one technical trade isn't going to serve you necessarily for life, right? If they're going to have 3 careers and 30 jobs over their lifetime.
Even before that, don't they, I mean, the numbers, when they come to talking about not knowing what they want to do, they change degree tracks.
Oh, 100%. And that's not uncommon. I mean, that's been probably going on for decades, where a student comes in, they start to explore things, their eyes are opened up in a broader liberal arts education, say, wow, I didn't even know that opportunity existed, Even for me, I started out in ministry. My scope of ministry was pretty small. And then as that expanded into higher education, and I'm the university president, I wasn't thinking that when I was 18 years old.
They don't have degrees in university.
Yeah, president, no.
Is that interesting?
So I think as students are thinking about the future and thinking about higher education, or as higher education is thinking about addressing those challenges and opportunities, it's for us to help students see that pathway. And I think that's a unique thing about SBU. One of the cool things I love about SBU, student comes to SBU, we promise that they'll be known by name. We are of the size that allows us to literally know every student, know something about them. Dr. Woodyard, you're incredibly involved in the lives of our students, where they see you, they know what's going on. As president, I'm actively involved in our students' lives and can call virtually every student by name and know about them, where they're from. You're not going to get that at every institution. You're not even going to get that at every other private Christian school. But I think those are some ways that we can help students that may be uncertain about that pathway to help them set them on a trajectory for life. And that's what I love about private higher education, or in particular Christian higher education, is we're about the whole student. We're thinking about not just a degree, not just about a trade, although again, trades are really valuable and important. When we think about tool belt generation, we want to think about how can we partner with students that may be thinking in those vacations to provide them more of that holistic experience so that there is spiritual development, so that there is growth in their development as a person over that 2 to 4 year experience.
I think that is such a good point when you talk about, if you connect with the development of the whole person idea to the fact that you're going to have 3 careers, 30 jobs, we're trying to shape the type of person
That's exactly right.
that can flourish in any walk of life.
That's exactly right.
So it becomes really important to go to an institution that isn't merely trying to give you a degree, but we want to confer degrees, but trying to shape you as a person, trying to shape you holistically. So when you walk away, you have the habits of head, habits of heart, the maturity to be able to walk into one of these 3 careers, to be able to walk in one of those 30 jobs and be successful.
That's right.
Because of who you are.
That's exactly right.
Well, that's people see the value in that, because one of the things that we've noticed as overall population, college age population is declining. There are other kinds of students besides college age that we can talk about in a minute, but that's gone down. Enrollment overall has trended down a little bit. There was a weird spike last year as maybe some students came in post-COVID, but the schools that have declined the least are private religious universities. So if you look at public schools, you look at private secular versus private religious, it's schools like us that have not necessarily gone gangbusters and grown enrollment by 10%, but we're almost holding flat or decreasing slightly, whereas others have a bigger decrease. And that's probably part of it. I mean, is that maybe part of how you'd explain it, as people seeing the value of this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think there are several things that are happening. I mean, we just came out of elections season, and I think people are very value oriented. So as a Christian institution, values connected to what we do, I think, are attractive to families. Like, as they think about, again, this idea of the whole person, instilling those kind of values, and whether they're Christian ideals or they're American ideals or country ideals, there's this sense in which people want values. So I think that's one of the pieces of it. The interesting dynamic, we talk about affordability and accessibility. Private colleges, which are historically considered more expensive, and certainly that's true of Ivy Leagues, are usually more accessible than even state schools, very often, even from a price standpoint. So I'll just give you one example. There's a few local state universities not far from us, and the number of Pell eligible students, meaning families coming from lower socioeconomic means, they attract about 20% of their population. Schools like SBU attract about 50% of our population from families, meaning that we're providing a pathway that is kind of an economic ladder, or we call social mobility, but it's an economic ladder to come from a lower socioeconomic means to receive a degree. And it's, historically, we've had strong programs in business, education, computer science, nursing, kind of jobs that provide you, kind of degrees and experiences that provide you with good jobs that do provide a great income, economic ladder for life. But that social mobility, I think, is a dynamic that is an important piece of which families are looking for, thinking about values within that. So I think one of the reasons why Christian education is bucking the trends across the country, in fact, we heard a lot of, a flat is the new up was a big conversation in enrollment. I know you certainly heard that in your enrollment meetings. We certainly heard that as presidents. And we had an uptick at SBU. In fact, I would say a lot of Christian institutions like SBU that are convictional and committed and really committed to their confessional identity saw an uptick in that enrollment this year. We were up by 4% across the board. And that's pretty unusual considering the rest of the entire industry is still on that economic decline.
Yeah. It's encouraging. I mean, because I don't think that trend's going to change.
Right.
I think that's going to, you're going to have more families looking for that, and more. And I also think Christian schools, and we talk about in a minute the vision for how we go forward, Christian schools are getting wise to having to diversify what they offer, and the ways that we offer programs, where maybe we've been a little slower than others on the industry as a whole, but I think we're catching up on that end. Is there anything else in sort of national market, Christian higher ed market that we didn't touch on that you think are just interesting trends that are?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talk about trust. I think trust is a big one. That's just a bigger question across all industries. So I think establishing trust as families consider and as individuals consider, there are 40 million or so individuals at some college and no degree or some college and no credential. which means they started in college but didn't finish for whatever reason. That's a large part of our population, right? I mean, there's primarily 25 years old to 45 or 55 years old and up, individuals who have some college. So one of the things that's important for all institutions is think about not just 18 to 22-year-olds. We know there's a decline in enrollment coming. There's still roughly the same 5,000 colleges and universities across the United States. How are we going to address many of those students who don't have, haven't finished a degree or don't have a credential to be able to use that in the marketplace? So, for us, we're thinking about civic engagement, church engagement, marketplace engagement, how we're equipping students to impact their communities wherever they go, whether it's in small towns or big cities or around the world, how we're equipping them for that global society to make a difference in the world. So otherwise, to become a contributor to their community. And we believe that as Christians, that's part of our civic duty, is to be actively involved. And, we're big proponents for things like religious liberty and freedom of speech and the ability for individuals to have civic impact and civic opportunity. So I think those kind of transformational impacts that can happen when you have a transformational experience at an institution, then you can take that into your community and bring that back and give back to your community.
Yeah, that's great. So SBU, now
yes.
we'll kind of really put the microscope on us. You mentioned already this year, and we've touched on it a couple times, overall enrollment up for the first time in 12 years. So it speaks to, we've seen that decline happening. We have an increase now this fall. We've made investments in some different programs, different deliveries. As you maybe just start with the context of all we've covered, enrollment cliff, Christian higher ed having a little niche in there, where are some of the things that you would want to first talk about of how we're trying to address that and thrive in
Absolutely.
these challenges?
Well, I think one is clarity. So, we've talked a lot about, this whole idea of unapologetic came from an idea that we started talking about unapologetically Christ-centered. So we are an unapologetically Christ-centered university. And this idea of kind of being unapologetic in a society that may be headed toward a post-Christian society, what does it mean for Christians and Christian families to be able to stand up and say, well, actually, I'm unapologetic about my convictions and my views, and we're not going to kind of allow the periphery of society to encroach upon our convictions, and stand up in such a way, in a winsome way, and in a Christ-like way, but also to be unapologetic about that. Like, we don't have to shrink back from our values and our convictions and our confessional commitments as an unapologetic university. So I think that clarity is really important.
I think people are seeing that.
Yes.
And seeing that, we really mean it. There's been a kind of, I've heard several times like, you're serious about, we're going to preach the Bible. We're going to talk about sin. We're going to talk about the gospel. We're going to be confessional. Like we're serious about those things, even down to things like job descriptions. And have you read the Baptist Faith and Message? That's our confessional document.
Right.
So when you say, one of the things I've appreciated about being here is that when you say that, I know, he means that.
Yeah.
And that's trickling down.
Yeah, I think that's so important. One of the things I just shared at our luncheon today at the scholarship luncheon is, for us, there are certain barometers that give you a sense of where things are. And for us, a sense of spiritual renewal on campus that we're seeing in chapel, that we're seeing in discipleship, intentional discipleship with our students, I think are really good indicators that they are things that students are desiring to be part of. So, we have a group that's called Locamente, meets on Thursday nights. It's a student-led worship service that probably garnered 20, 30, 40 students in the past. They're having students come, like 175 to 200 students on a Thursday night at 10 p.m.
People coming to faith in Christ.
People coming to know Christ, student testimonies that are leading others to Christ. I think 4, or I think I even heard more recently, 7 students have come to know Christ. So these are things that are happening not because of things directly that you and I are doing. They're indirectly happening because of what we're setting up as a university. But I think those kind of things are happening, and I'm seeing that across the landscape. We heard about some revivals at campuses. I saw on social media today, another institution had 2,000 students gathered for worship last night. We're seeing our chapels are packed full and students sitting up front. That wasn't happening even at SBU. That wasn't happening just a few years ago. So we're seeing, I think there's an appetite that's growing, that students are desirous of this. It's not just something that's required, it's something that's desired. And I think as we're stirring the affections with our students toward God, we're beginning to see that reflection take place in that barometer of spiritual renewal. So I think as families consider, one of the things I talk about value and cost, there's also a cost to count when you're thinking about where you would pursue your education. So if you're just looking for a credential or degree, there might be a pathway toward that. But when you're thinking about life transformation, you need to count the cost of the influences that you're going to have over that degree program. So it's a 2-year, 4-year, whatever that looks like. Counting the cost of what the implications would be should you choose not to go to a Christian school. I'm amazed at the families that pay for K through 12 Christian education and then send their kids to a private school. Now, send their kids to a public school. I'm not anti-public at all. In fact, we partner very closely with our public institutions locally, and many of the presidents actually at our local institutions are Christians, and I love that. We do have a great partnership with that. So I'm not anti-public by any means. But there is a shaping that takes place in a transformational way at an institution like SBU, where I would, as a parent, and as a student, I would say that kind of clarity is really essential, because your life is going to be transformed more in these 4 years than any other time in life. I mean, it's kind of like, what you need to know in life you learned as a kindergartner. I forget the name of the book, but I think that's indicative as well of the 4-year experience that you have in a college, university experience. And I think families are still looking for that. So I think it's important as families consider the cost of that, how that affects what that looks for, but they really need to think about the trajectory of life and the utility of that for the impact that they can have for all of life. So I think that's where SBU sits in a unique place to think about that. So we're helping a student think about their first year experience at SBU, their first job, but we're also thinking about an extraordinary life that they can lead. You talked a little bit about kind of portfolio of opportunities.
Yeah.
As Christian institutions, as SBU in particular, we're really blessed. We have traditional students, we have non-traditional students, we have graduate programs, we have doctoral programs, we have pathways that students can go from an undergrad in exercise science or kinesiology into a doctor of physical therapy program, or an educator can get an undergrad in education, a master's degree, a specialist degree, a doctorate in education. In fact, about half of the superintendents in our region have SBU, they're alumni. They've graduated from SBU, many with their EDD. So we're having a huge impact, and that's in the public sector of public schools and many Christian schools as well. We're having that impact of equipping students into their career and into their vocation to have an impact for Christ and wherever they go. And I think that is part of our historic mission that we've been doing for 146 years. And I love that. I mean, what a great place to live and work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not stopping there. One couple of things I was thinking of as you're talking. So one is, I don't ever want to sell a student on just come here for 2 years and get the gen eds. But if a student is looking at engineering, for instance, because that's a program that we've talked about potentially adding.
Right.
We don't currently have an engineering degree. So if you're a family who's looking at programs in colleges and you're like, man, my student really wants to become an engineer, so I'm going to go look at an engineering school and I'm just going to send my student to that college. I mean, those are really opportunities in those particular situations to say, well, I can get my gen eds anywhere. And especially schools like us where we have articulation agreements with schools that have engineering degrees.
Right.
Well, why wouldn't I just go for really value that formation that's going to take place and at least get that for 2 years for my gen eds? And if a Christian school doesn't have the degree, I mean, we can't fix that. We would be very understanding of that. But at least come, get those 2 years, and then you can go into those programs that maybe we don't offer. And maybe while you're here, you discover, I don't know that I want to be an engineer. Maybe I do want to be a physical therapist or something else. So that's one piece. But then the other part of it is too, I mean, there are real things that happen here that are going to be different than at a public school. And so just seeing that the degree, the training, just the nuts and bolts of what you're going to learn at a large state university versus a private Christian university, there's a lot of alignment.
Yes.
They're going to be very similar in a lot of ways. But it's the formation piece that it is absolutely critical, and it cannot be replicated.
Yeah, and it's not just formation. I would also argue it's worldview. Because I think there's a worldview component from a biblical worldview, from a perspective. We talk about, in Christian education, we talk about the integration of faith and learning. This idea that every single thing we do, we look through a unique lens into that. So, kind of just thinking about how do we think about biology? How do we think about chemistry? How do we think about education? Well, we actually look through a lens, through a biblical worldview into each of those areas, and that shapes the outcomes of the student and the educational experience. So a simple biology 101 class at this institution compared to another institution isn't actually going to be the same. You're going to learn basic biology, yes, but you're going to look through it from a lens with a biblical worldview. And I think families especially Christian families in particular, but any family that values the kind of values that we have as an institution, allows them to think about how their worldview is going to be shaped.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what we're dealing with in our society, whether it's low trust or even whether it's polarization in society, is an opportunity for us to think about worldviews and how those worldviews shape the next generation of students. One of the things I'm super encouraged about with this generation of students, there is a great appetite for students to have greater devotion, greater discipline, greater discipleship, greater commitment to going back and impacting. It's not just a me generation that says, give me my degree and I want to go make money. It's really a generation that says, I want to make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, there's no greater person on this planet than Christ, who came to this world to make a difference in the world, and we live out that as servant leaders into the society, into the communities that we live. And I love that. I think it's an incredible thing.
Every student that comes here has to go through university seminar, and one of the assignments, I'm teaching a section of it now, one of the assignments they have to think through, and a lot of kids have never thought through it, but it's what's your view of the world. They have to do a worldview assignment. And I talk about my worldview. This is the lens through which I view all of reality, and then challenging them to think through maybe you're not a Christian kid in that room, maybe you are, but regardless, how do you view the world? What's the authority for the view of the world? Every kid that comes here has to think through that.
Yeah. I want to mention that because you said whether you're a believer or not an unbeliever. At SBU, one of the things that's unique about SBU as a Christian school is we actually don't require students to have a confessional statement or to be a Christian to come to SBU. It's actually part of our historic mission. We consider it more of an evangelistic outreach as an institution. We do have many, many students who choose us that are Christian families looking for a Christian education. We still provide a Christian education regardless of the student that comes. The student comes and knows Christ, we help them grow in their relationship with Christ and discipleship. If they don't know Christ, we continue to point them to Christ. But we're shaping them with a biblical worldview, regardless of their background and experience or religious convictions. Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing. Last thing I just want to say, I think is important as you think about institutions. For a long time, I think people have been enamored with big universities and big athletic programs and big things. You can get lost in the bigness of an institution. And that could be true. Many of our students come from small towns of 900, so people can feel, even lost at a place like SBU. But when you're known by name and you have a professor that's investing in you and you're getting real world experience as a student, one of the things we talk about at SBU, if you're in our science program, you're going to do research with a professor. All of our classes are taught by professors, by the way. We don't have TAs. You're not going to get some graduate student teaching your class. You're going to have a full professor who has, credentialed in that area to be able to teach in the area and do research with you. You're not going to get that kind of experience in an undergrad program virtually anywhere in the country until you go into a graduate program. Yeah. But at a smaller place like SBU, we have that kind of intentionality. There's a discipleship relationship. There's a research opportunities. There's internship opportunities. There's service opportunities. We send our students out on global mission trips. There's just so many things that you are able to do. And in fact, do many of those things that you're not able to always do at a big institution. So sometimes people think big is more opportunity, and it may be. They may have degrees that we don't offer, or they may have other things we don't offer. But I think there's a uniqueness to what I would just like to say, kind of, small is big, and small can be better. And so as families are thinking about, all of these decisions of, say, brand strength of an institution. A lot of times we've heard for years, someone who graduates with XYZ degree from XYZ institution, the brand strength of that's going to help you get a job. But empirically, that's actually not true. Yeah. It's about relationships, it's about connections, and it's about the preparedness of that student. We're really proud of our nursing students, for example. They have a 100% pass rate, first-time pass rate on their NCLEX, nursing licensure exam. That kind of outcome sets our students up for success in life. You're not going to have that at a bigger program where you're not being invested in at that personal level. And I think those are special ways from a biblical worldview, from a connection opportunity, and for that personal connection that I think is a really unique part about SBU we've been doing for 146 years.
Yeah. One thing I thought about just as you're going through that and how we are addressing it, because we talked about value, we talked about cost, but affordability is something we spent a lot of time thinking about, and we're continually thinking about ways that we can address that. And so there's a lot of things that we have done to do it. One is, you may not think of this and tying it to affordability, but we did. we had a lot of degree programs that required more than 120 credit hours.
Yep.
So if you think about the math of that, that could require more than 4 years, more than 8 semesters of coursework, which that's more dollars you're having to spend to complete your degree. So we changed all of that, got everything down to 120 credit hour for programs. So that makes things more affordable. We offer now a lot of dual credit, whether it's at high schools or online, that allows students to collect, stack up a lot of hours that you can bring into SBU that actually goes towards your gen eds, that knocks out more time that you have to spend getting your degree and spending less money ultimately when you're here. And we offer a ton of scholarships. I think that's you hinted at it with a lot of the other schools nearby. If you line up our bottom line cost for an SBU degree, once all financial aid is factored in, all scholarships, grants, everything that you earn that we provide students, whether it's from private scholarships like the luncheon today or academic scholarships, it's within a couple $1,000s of state schools when it all comes down to the bottom line cost. And I would argue, I think we all would, that if it's a couple $2,000-3,000 difference of what you're going to pay for a state university versus what you're going to pay at a small Christian college like us, that I think we're worth an extra $2,000 or $3,000 a year to get that experience. Now, I would not tell someone to take on an extra $40,000 of debt a year necessarily, unless you just have the means and you're going to do it. But that's not what most students do. Most students, if you're going to come here, I think our average debt load at graduation is in the $20,000 range.
That's exactly right.
It's
between $20,000 and
$25,000.
$25,000. And I like to say, that's basically the cost of a mid-sized car. And when we buy a car, we know that it's going to decrease in value from the day that you drive it off of the lot, whether it's used car or new car, right? But I think as you think about Christian education, or you think about any education, it's an investment for life. And the utility of that continues to have value. Yeah, and so I think there are key dynamics as Christian families. You were talking about this earlier, but I would highlight a couple of these others. SBU Prep, SBU Academy. These are kind of pipelines that as families who have students who are juniors and seniors can start getting a little bit of a head start toward college. That saves cost without a doubt. I think there's the other side of education in families that are thinking about not just 18 to 22-year-olds and prepping them, but that's that person who's out there maybe as a teacher right now, the master's degree and those kind of things were very affordable. We have very, not just affordable, but a comparable cost to most any other program in our region. So as families are thinking about that, as individuals are thinking about higher education, again, Christian worldview provides that. We do that in our graduate program, just like we do our undergraduate programs. And I think those can have huge impacts. The thing I love about SBU, we have 50,000 alumni across the entire world that we have graduated and sent out. There's literally not a place across the world where the sun ever sets on a Bearcat. Yeah. So we know that we're making an impact in the world. And for us, as this generation of leaders at SBU, we're setting a trajectory for the next 150 years so that the mission that we feel called to as a Christ-centered, caring academic community, knowing that we're preparing servant leaders to impact the world for Christ and global society, will continue on for the next 150 years. And that's what I'm most excited about as president. Awesome.
Yeah. It's the year of enthusiasm and optimism.
That's exactly right. Enthusiasm. Yes, enthusiasm. The root word of enthusiasm, in theos, which means in God or God within. Yeah. And that's exactly right. This is our year of optimism and enthusiasm, which I love.
Yeah. I'm optimistic and enthusiastic.
Yeah, and Christians should be, right? I mean, we, the God within, we are.
That's
God
100%
is in
true.
us. Amen.
Yeah. If anyone has joy, we should have joy.
That's exactly
and
right.
We do.
And we do. Yeah. And I love that you guys are doing this. This is a great podcast. I'm honored to be a part of it. And
he's the brains. I just show up again.
The face for radio.
Face for radio.
You guys are awesome. Glad you're on the team.
Yeah, we are thrilled to be serving with you too, and we will be back again next week for another topic. It might just be you and me.
What are we doing?
I don't know yet. It'll be a surprise. We didn't get that far ahead.
You guys won't be all dressed up. We were dressed up for lunch, by the way. We probably should tell people this. I mean, you kind of maybe expect the president to always be in a bow tie, but I think today we honestly, other's we dressed just like Dr. Woodyard.
I have nice khaki pants on. I hung my jacket in my office.
Right. You ready for the camp out tomorrow?
Camp out,
man,
absolutely. Very excited. The first annual great SBU camp out. We've got tents out on the forum right now. There's going to be campfires. There's going to be live music. Starts at 7. Dr. Melson has the glamping tent. So do I. that we've got set up. It's going to be fun. I think we've
it's gonna
got
be amazing.
70 or 80 students have already registered.
That's awesome.
So for the first one, we didn't know what to expect. We have prayed that it would not rain. It looks like it's going to be clear. I'm excited. I'm excited. We're gonna sit around the campfire. We're gonna talk about Jesus. I'm gonna share my story. We're gonna talk about things. We're gonna sing, give away some prizes. I'm excited. Just another thing that we're doing.
New tradition, great new tradition.
Great new tradition. Energy on campus. Kids are excited to be just part of that culture. And again, it's a thing that shapes them. Everything we're doing, getting to this idea.
That's
Everything
right.
we're doing is trying to shape. So we're not just camping out, but we're trying to build community. We want kids to have a sense of belonging here at SBU, and hope this helps.
That's right. I love it.
Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll be back next week for something.
Awesome.
We'll talk about the camp
It's
out.
going to be fantastic.
Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks.